haven't spoken to you in a while, in part because I've been working on a new book. And before I introduce the book, I just want to talk a little bit about the history of my history with the Tantric tradition. I've been studying since 1969, 50 years ago, when I was a teenager in Orange County, California. And I started learning basic Tantric meditation from a monk of the Ramakrishna order. And I was very drawn to the personality of Ramakrishna from the outset. I just saw a photograph of him that really captured my heart in some powerful and direct way, to the point where I went home that day from the first visit to the monastery and asked my father to procure some modeling clay for me, which I'd never done ever in my life. And when I got the clay, I tried to model a figure of Ramakrishna to the best of my ability, and set up on my dresser and began sitting in front of it and meditating on it. In the past 50 years, that hold that Ramakrishna had on me, like grabbing me by the neck, as it were, has never released, thank goodness. And so, in reading about Ramakrishna's life, you can't help but notice his deep involvement with the Tantric tradition. They talk about his Tantric guru, the Bhairavi Ishwari, and how she had him perform the rituals of 64 tantras. There were 3 sets of 64 in the South Asian continent, and I'm assuming she had him do the 64 that was local to Bengal and where he was from, where they both were from. And in any case, when you read about his tantric experiences, you only get little bits. You don't really get a coherent philosophy or methodology. You only hear about some of the more dramatic tests that he underwent. And it's perplexing. You wonder, how do those things, meditating on a corpse or things like that, fit in his whole life, and it creates questions. And you can rest with those questions and just be a devotee of Ramakrishna and kind of put those aside, say, okay, well, that's what he did, and then he went beyond that. But if you really go deeply into his life, you realize, no, he didn't go beyond it. He did dabble in other things, but by and far, his whole life was defined by the categories of Tantra, the way he approached spiritual practice, the kinds of practices he did, even when he was so-called doing other religions like Islam or Christianity. There were tantric elements in the way he approached them. So it was the way he learned to do religion, really, was Tantra. Everything else was just sort of window dressing as far as I'm concerned. In any case, when you go deeply into what he did and look for some kind of methodology, you have to look at Tantric ritual. Now, unless you live either in India or in one of the centers in America of the Vedanta Society where they do Tantric ritual openly in public, you may never encounter any such ritual. And even if you did encounter them, they would seem strangely exotic and frankly just incomprehensible. There's snapping of fingers and things flying around and water splashed here and there, and what is, in all kinds of mantras in Sanskrit, what does it all mean, you know? If it's just a simple devotional exercise like it's often represented, why is all that necessary? Why not just take your offering and simply offer it? A little flowers, a little leaf, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita in the 9th chapter, a flower, a leaf, some water, offered with devotion is enough. So why all the mantras and mudras and mumbo jumbo, unless there's something else going on? And of course, there is something else going on. The Tantric tradition is profoundly sophisticated, and its methods are largely misunderstood even by those who employ them. I was fortunate to be tutored by the chief ritualist at the headquarters of the Ramakrishna order, Swami Mahavirananda, in 1977. I was on my way out of the order at that point, but one of my projects was to learn more about the tantric ritual that they do every day, and I had consulted our local pujari and another pujari being a ritualist, about the ritual. I had transliterated the Bengali ritual mantras into Devanagari Sanskrit script because I read that more readily, and the language is actually Sanskrit. And so I presented my notebook to this chief ritualist who'd been in that position for decades, and asked him to help me understand it. And so really he was reluctant at first, because I think he thought I wanted him to just teach me everything. And no, I'd already done a lot of self-study. I just wanted him to fill in the blanks, things I couldn't understand on my own. And so he went through it with me in great detail and showed me how to specifically to do each mudra, and he corrected some of the mantras and changed the order of things and so on. Even though I had written my notes based upon his Bengali book, he said he was working on a new puja book. But some notable things that I can relate from that experience. First of all, I asked what Tantra this puja notebook was based upon, and he said without hesitation, Yogini Tantra, and he actually wrote it in Bengali script right in my notebook. And then he pointed out one section of the puja called Bhuta Shuddhi, or purification of the elements, as the heart of the ritual. He said, if you do this, you get the benefit of the whole ritual. Now, the ritual is kind of elaborate. I mean, it can be done in stages. It doesn't. There's a 10 item, a 5 item, a 10 item, a 15 item, or 16 item rather, and so you can make it very elaborate. And some rituals, puja rituals, go on for days, like Durga Puja, for instance. It's just passed recently. Kali Puja also is very elaborate, but he said all that, those special implements, brass kind of vessels that you can't easily get except in India, he said all that is really unnecessary if you do this one process called purification of the elements. And that process is mostly an interior process, a meditation, a visualization, that deals with the very concrete and specific tantric concepts of kundalini and the chakras and things like that, that are also very often misunderstood in the West and misrepresented in all kinds of ways. In any case, that was a clue he gave me. He didn't go into all the detail, he didn't explain every single thing, but he gave me enough so that over the years, when I went back to my notes and began to practice what he had told me to do, I began to see, it began to teach me from within what this ritual was really about. Now, there are people who do Bhuta Shuddhi in one form or another who never really understand it. And it's not terribly complicated, but it's not also terribly obvious when you read about it, read the description as it's represented in puja manuals, what exactly you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's unfortunate because you need to know what you're doing for it to work properly. So anyway, I want to introduce you to my new book. It's called Practical Tantra. And although I've written extensively about gay Tantra, I felt my community was really neglected and needed that attention. In this book, decided that I was going to write for a general audience. And I also decided I was going to include specific details that I never really thought I would before publicly. And there are reasons why I decided to reveal these things, mainly because you really need to know all this in order to make it work, to make it practical. So I'll sum up with just by saying that Tantra is a sophisticated psychological system for experiencing enlightenment. And its methods are based upon the idea that you start with the person that you experience yourself to be, and then develop a deeper understanding of who you are until you realize that you are infinite consciousness. And the ritual takes you step by step through this process so that our very materialistic, very dualistic minds can gradually assimilate the idea that what we experience as our separateness exists in an unbroken sea of existence, an unbroken sea of awareness, and that once we let go of that separateness, we can merge into that original self, which is undying, unborn, infinite, and full of bliss. So I look forward to talking to you more about the book, and if you want to get a copy of the book, which is now available only through lulu.com, then go to lulu.com and look for Practical Tantra. Thanks.